Testing. Testing. Hey YouTube. Today, hey Daryl Deemer, welcome to the stream, man. How's the sound? Testing, sound check. Um, to, hey Laura, thanks Laura. Today I wanted to start the substrate section of the So You Bought a Fish Tank talks. Substrate is an interesting topic because for many people that have just gone out and bought a fish tank and some fish, it's a lot of times it's their children's choice, the fish, the tank, and so they will let the children pick. Comic-Con, Cobwebs Cavern, welcome to the stream, and Comic-Con sounds pretty fun too. I don't blame you for missing. A lot of times parents will let the child pick the substrate, and they'll get pink gravel or yellow gravel or some kind of wildly colored, what we in the hobby often call clown puke gravel, and decorations that match. And while we may look down our nose, regular hobbyists may look down our nose at all those things, anything that causes a child or a parent or a new fish keeper to spend time watching the tank, it's proven scientifically that it reduces stress, that it is meditative to sit and simply watch a fish tank and watch fish in a fish tank. It's highly relaxing, as most of us all know. And so anything that a child chooses or that the new hobbyist chooses that they enjoy, the scuba diver with the treasure chest bubble wand, the clown puke gravel or the bright pink gravel, some kind of strange fake plant decorations. Hey Kaler's Aquatics, welcome to the stream. Kaler, you suggested that I do an around the world to talk about all my tanks. I ended up having some house guests today, so I'm not going to do that today. I'll try to get my tanks up to snuff and do that next week. Or maybe I'll just do an around the world look for a video. But what I wanted to broach here is the idea that anything that the new hobbyist chooses because they want to look at it, the half blown up battleship decoration, the wrecked airplane decoration, the octopus with the floating arms decoration, any of those kinds of things which cause someone, either the hobbyists themselves or their children, to spend time watching a fish tank is a good thing and can lead to them actually becoming more attached to the idea of a fish tank and more attached to the idea of keeping and watching fish, So as much fun as we all make, um, yeah, you're right. Thanks, V Stag, and welcome to the stream, man. Um, so let's talk about substrate because this new hobbyist has found a fish that they just can't walk out of the store without. The salesperson has sold them a fish tank, let's say a 10-gallon tank. And then the salesperson says, well, you need to get some substrate to put in the bottom of this tank. And let's talk about, hey, Lumpy Dog, welcome to the stream, man. Let's talk about the different kinds of substrate that the hobbyist can choose, what the different kinds of substrate can do, either for the fish or for plants. There are a lot of different kinds of substrates out there. You can buy just plain gravel. You can buy painted gravel. You can buy large gravel. You can buy small gravel. And and one of the things that I think it's kind of incumbent on us to recognize is that 9 times out of 10 in the wild, where you're going to find gravel in lakes and rivers and streams, that gravel has been washed down a mountainside, um, along a stream bed for a long time. And usually all that gravel and river rock will be rounded. It will not have sharp edges on it. You're not going to have, like if you go buy sharp sand is used for masonry and construction work. And if you go buy a bag of sharp sand and use it as a substrate, then your fish will be dealing with sharper edges. And old school thinking was that that sharp sand might be bad for your Corydorus who love to dig through the sand. A lot of thinking was that it would harm their barbels, the little feelers they have on their noses. But in the wild, almost all substrate, sand, rocks, gravel, dirt, all of this stuff will have been washed and pounded against other pieces of rock and gravel and sand for such a long period of time that it will be very smooth. So most of the gravel that we will buy to put in our tanks as substrate will be rounded gravel. It will not be a sharp or a rough edged gravel. It's going to be some kind of smooth, rounded gravel because in nature, the water forcing the gravel and the rocks along will slowly pound away at sharp and rough edges and break them down. And what you end up with is round sand, round rocks, round gravel. When Corey and Dean and Joseph and I were in Peru, we went into some rivers that had rocks that were, small boulder size in them, but they were all almost completely round. They had smooth edges. There were no rough, sharp edges, and and it didn't matter how large the rocks were or how small the rocks were. They were all rounded because they had been rolled and washed and banged down the sides of these mountains or hills so long and with such force by the water that it had smoothed them all out. So it's pretty common to get a rounded gravel substrate, and we put these in our tanks. So this new person will have the choice of buying small rounded gravel, large rounded gravel, um, rounded sand or smooth sand, or any number of artificially created or artificially enhanced substrates that can be bought in bags from larger companies, Eco-Complete, Brightwell, all of the different kinds of substrates. And the ones that have been enhanced and the ones that are basically for a niche product, most of the, like Eco-Complete and the Brightwell, these are designed to do certain things in a fish tank or a shrimp tank. Some of them adjust the pH of the water. Some of them will adjust the total dissolved solids in the water. And there are a lot of different choices out there for fish tanks that are for fish tanks that are for shrimp, fish tanks that are for plants, fish tanks that are for plants and fish, and community tanks. And most new people to the hobby will end up doing a community tank. And a lot of them will choose plastic plants in the beginning, but if they are really daring and like the looks of some of the live plants that the store has for sale, they may well go for a planted substrate. And if they go for a planted substrate, there are a lot of different ways for that to be done. The gravel, if you're just using plain gravel and putting fertilizer in the water, you probably need about 2 inches of gravel or an inch and a half of gravel, of just plain substrate gravel in a tank. If you go much deeper than that, if you go 3 inches to 4 inches to 6 inches, you will end up with 2 different kinds of bacteria inhabiting that gravel. There are 2 different kinds of bacteria everywhere in the world. There is aerobic bacteria, bacteria that function in the presence of air or oxygen or nitrogen. And then there are anaerobic bacteria that function in the lack of air. They have no direct contact with oxygen. The anaerobic bacteria will take up residence in deep gravel beds or deep sand beds. Hey Joseph, welcome to the stream. And hey Kathy B, welcome to the stream too. The anaerobic bacteria will take up residence in deep gravel beds, deep sand beds, maybe even in a fairly shallow gravel bed that's underneath rocks or things like that. Places where oxygen is no longer being able to access that gravel. And while we're all pretty much familiar with the anaerobic bacterias and their product of producing nitrate from ammonia and nitrite, they break ammonia down into nitrite and they break nitrite down into nitrate, and nitrate is the end result. Anaerobic bacteria, bacteria that do not contact with air, usually work with sulfuric compounds. And what they do is produce sulfur dioxide as their waste product or the byproduct of their actions. And sulfur dioxide is most often in a gas form, And this gas, or it will create a bubbling gas form, and this gas form will rise up out of that deep substrate bed, slowly work its way to the surface, and it is toxic to fish and to other bacterias and basically whatever might come in contact with it. Now, in the old days, most people would tell you not to use a deep sand bed because if you used a deep sand bed, you would end up seeing blackened where it was up against the tank. Deep down in the bottom of it, you would end up seeing blackened areas, and those blackened areas would be anaerobic bacteria that were, quote, quote, highly dangerous to your fish and tank. In this day and age, enough research has been done where there are some people that actively seek out deep beds where anaerobic bacteria can function because of how anaerobic bacteria breaks down some of the elements that are in the tanks. So oftentimes people these days, in this day and age, will allow for deep gravel beds. So the old saw of saying, don't put your gravel in the bottom of a new tank more than about an inch or an inch and a half deep is not necessarily the truth anymore, and it's really kind of a crapshoot for someone that is new to the hobby to try to just guess what they like best and put it in their tank. Um, you can get lucky. You can also get lucky and have someone who works at the store who's knowledgeable enough to give you good advice. But unless you are going heavily planted on a brand new tank, in which case I would have recommended that you take the tank home, set everything up, let it cycle, and put plants in the tank for 30 days before you put the first fish in the tank. I would suggest that you're probably better off not going more than a couple of inches deep with whatever substrate that you choose. Now you may bank it up and make contours and topography in the tank because that's what you like. Hey McMurray, welcome to the stream. So we've got this new fish keeper, and they have bought a 5-pound bag of river rock gravel, and they're putting it in the bottom of their tank. If the kind of fish that they, back when I was first a actual hobbyist, not just someone that kept fish, but someone who kind of really understood what was going on, under gravel filters were all the rage. And for an under gravel filter to work, you put the under gravel filter down in the bottom of the tank, bare bottom first, and then you put your gravel on top of the under gravel filter, and the air stone in the rise tube will pull water through the gravel into the under gravel filter and back up through the lift tube. And it will create a flow where your tank, the oxygenated water will go through the full level of gravel that is on top of that under gravel plate, and it will give more bacteria a place to colonize because that water is not just flowing over the surface of that gravel, but it is actually passing all the way through the gravel. Now, when you use an under gravel plate, you need to vacuum it because detritus and uneaten food and plant matter will all end up pulled down into that gravel, and it will create a problem if you don't occasionally really vacuum tube that gravel up so that it gets broken apart and all the detritus comes out of it, and then it settles back down onto the under gravel plate. But those of us who have kept large cichlids know that in the case of using an under gravel filter, large cichlids will dig pits in whatever substrate is on the bottom of the tank. In fact, they will completely remodel a tank. And so in the cases of large cichlids, someone keeping a larger cichlid, if you're using an under gravel plate, you probably need to put 1.5 inches of gravel down on that plate, then add an egg crate diffuser or some kind of netting like window screening or something, and then put another 1.5 inches of gravel on top of that. Now you've created a deep gravel bed there, but what you've also done is given a cichlid a chance to dig a pit in the gravel without destroying your under gravel filtration by digging all the way down to the under gravel plate. Because if you dig a hole in the middle of a tank full of substrate that goes all the way down to an under gravel plate, then the lift tube is only going to pull the water down through that hole. It's not going to pull water down through the whole plate of gravel. So if someone is new to the hobby and has somehow managed to either learn about or get sold an under gravel plate, and they buy their substrate for their new tank, and they've also bought a baby Oscar or a baby Jack Dempsey or several of the larger cichlids in young form, they should probably double up on their gravel and put egg crate diffuser panel or some form of netting to not allow the cichlids to dig all the way to the bottom. So that's kind of a strange little addition in this bit about trying to talk about substrate, but I think that it is a wise choice for someone new to the hobby who has been sold an under gravel plate to go, as a cheap method of filtration for this new tank they've just bought. That if they have a larger cichlid in their fish grouping, then they probably need to go ahead and double up on that gravel on the under gravel plate. It's really up to the aesthetics of the buyer to choose what kind of gravel they start out with when they buy their first fish tank. And yet there are a great many choices out there. Like I said, being old school, I learned to avoid sand long ago because I feared the anaerobic issues that can develop. But sand can make a wonderful choice for even a planted tank. Sand can make a very beautiful. Um, you can get black sand, you can get white sand, you can get the normal tan sand, and many of those things will do an excellent job of setting off the colors of the fish you have chosen. And actually, some species, shrimp, and some species of cichlids are more comfortable with a darker or lighter substrate. You can watch their colorations change depending on a substrate. Um, if you go with pea gravel or small gravel of many different colors, so that you end up with a kind of a mixed color, and I mean natural colors, reddish brown, beige, tan, whitish, pinkish, maybe a little bit. Um, Many hobbyists will tell you that you will have better survival rates of egg scatterer like tetras, um, those that don't lay egg plaques or don't lay their eggs on the sides of a tank or on a pot or a clay fixture or a lift tube or a power head. Um, Egg scatterers, eggs will survive much better on a multicolored substrate than they will on just a regular um, light or dark substrate, because it is harder for the other fish to see those eggs on a multicolored background. So there are a lot of different choices out there, and of course, most new fish keepers aren't going to really understand what all those choices represent. And it would probably be good for them to go ahead and either ask someone who knows to begin with, what kind of substrate do I need? Um, of course, impulse buying will cause them to just buy whatever they come home with sometimes. And that's okay too. You can always save that gravel, that later on you may need to bolster an under gravel filter plate, and that pink gravel can be easily hidden underneath several inches of normal, natural, multicolored gravel. And I just think that this is a topic that has a great deal of variation and a great deal of value to it. That you could go with a Wallstead method for a planted tank and use actual dirt from your backyard. I think a lot of people would tell you to bake it for a little while to try to get parasites or pathogens out of that soil before you just stick it in the tank. But I think there are a lot of people that just go for broke and stick it in their tank. I would recommend in that case that you cap that dirt with some kind of gravel. You can cap it with sand, but it won't stay capped. Joseph says he has dirted shrimp tanks, and Kaler's talking about the colored clown vomit. Um, it's There is a process that goes on over a period of time in a fish tank substrate where the smaller particles will slowly work their way down to the bottom. Kathy B says, back in the day, all I had for filtration was box filters or under gravel filter. Both are great for the right situation. As a kid, I never saw sand for sale, just gravel. No one had plant substrate. Yeah, that's all I remember mostly too, Kathy. Although many people that were keeping Africans back in the day would go buy sand from a local hardware store, or um, you could get sharp sand or rounded sand or river sand, uh, but they bought it from places that were supplying construction mostly. But if you take sand, take like a quarter inch of sand and pour it on top of a dirted tank, that sand is going to work its way down into that dirt because of the particles being smaller than the hunks of dirt, and you will end up with a dirted tank again that has sand down inside of it. If you put sand on the surface of a gravel substrate or a eco-complete substrate, you will watch that sand slowly work its way right down into that other substrate, and you will end up with a substrate that is sand on the bottom, the smallest particles of the eco-complete in the middle, and then the larger pieces of the eco-complete on top. It is just a natural settling process that occurs. You might put 3 inches of gravel in a tank, and over a period of a month or two, watch that collapse back down into 2 inches because of just the normal settling that's going to go on, the vibrations in the floorboard when people walk, the highway traffic of nearby roads will slowly vibrate the bottom of that tank until that substrate will settle and pack and get harder and harder. And if the kinds of fish that you want to keep are sand sifters or spend a lot of time with their barbels buried in the sand, and there are a lot of different types of fish that do that, that love to sift through the sand for particles of food, then you probably just want to go with sand as your substrate. If you're going to be keeping shell dwellers or some larger cichlid, if you fall in love with a jaguar cichlid juvenile, you probably are going to want a couple of inches at least of a larger pea gravel, because those fish are going to move that stuff all around the tank. So if you have a really fine substrate, they are going to make a mess out of the water. I wouldn't advise keeping larger cichlids on a dirted tank, because the tank is going to look like chocolate milk all the time, because they will dig, they will rearrange the furniture in their tank. It's just their nature. They uproot plants. They are going to disturb whatever is used as substrate. It's important that new fish hobbyists understand that one of the places in your fish tank where the most bacteria operate from is the substrate. So larger pieces of gravel will not pack as finely as smaller pieces of gravel or sand over a long period of time, and it will allow a deeper bed of bacteria to function. Now that bed can also be filled up with detritus and mulm on the bottom of that tank. So it's important for new hobbyists to understand what the many different functions are for the substrate in the tank. it is a aesthetic function in that it is the basis for how the tank is put together, and is something that can cause you to spend a great deal of time looking at it. It is a bacteria medium where most of the bacteria in your fish tank will be colonized in the underground, in the substrate, or in the substrate over an under gravel filter. It is also a anchoring device for plants. It gives them a place for their roots to function. And it is also a feeding area for those roots. So in a tank, heavily planted tank, it will be the place where the root systems of the planted tanks will grow and help hold down and feed the plants. So there are a lot of different functions for the substrate, which just looks like something pretty in the tank to a lot of new hobbyists. And it's incumbent on hobbyists to understand what those different kinds of needs and potentialities are with their substrate, so that they can choose wisely. Now, that doesn't mean that your first 10-gallon tank that has the clown puke gravel in it can't stay exactly like it is. But if you get bitten by the bug and find another fish that you want to keep, or if your 20 guppies that you bought have 100 fry and you need a larger tank, then it behooves you at that point to have done more research about the substrate and to recognize that substrate is a really important part of how we set up fish tanks. Now, there are a lot of cases where a simple bare bottom tank is extremely valuable as well. In instances where you are doing quarantining, a bare bottom tank is most useful. You can observe detritus to see if there's any sign of parasitic infestation. You can clean the tanks better. In instances where you are raising fry in a small tank, bare bottom is going to be better because you will be able to see the potentially rotting food that the fry have not eaten and get it out before it disturbs water quality. But if you have a bare bottom tank on a shelf that can be seen through, and you have fish in that tank, if there's another tank underneath that shelf that has a light on it, the fish are going to be really uncomfortable because it is not natural to them to be able to look through the bottom of their habitat and see something else underneath it. So fish will normally be more comfortable in a tank with a substrate on it because it blocks their view of what is underneath them. Now you can also put a board or some kind of shelf paper or something underneath a bare bottom tank so that they are no longer looking through the bottom of their tank into another tank, or to the top of another tank, or to a light, or to a stack of books underneath them. Excuse me. So substrate is valuable to keep fish comfortable. It's valuable to be something that you prefer to look at. It's valuable as a biomedium. It's valuable as a plant anchoring and plant root feeding medium. There are a lot of more uses for substrate, and I'm missing many of these. It's a very deep and wide subject, and there are thousands of different kinds of substrates out there available to modern hobbyists, including the dirt in their own backyard. So I just want new hobbyists to recognize what the substrate represents and to recognize the many and varied choices there are out there and why a lot of these different kinds of substrates are available. Um, it behooves the new hobbyist to read the instruction manual on the outside of a bag of substrate so that it can um, inform you as to what this substrate is intended for or as to what is in this substrate. And hey Punchy, hey Pam, how's it going? Welcome to the stream. It's a When we first go and buy substrate, we just grab a bag of gravel and don't even think about it. But there's a lot more going on with the substrate. Kathy B says, I hate glass bottom elevators, so I can relate to fish discomfort to unpainted bare bottom tanks. Yeah. Yeah, it makes, a lot of fish need dither fish, need hiding places, need all kinds of things to make them comfortable in their non-natural fish tank. If you have a bare bottom tank and that fish can see through that bare bottom to something that shouldn't be there in nature, then they are going to be that much more uncomfortable. So it's really important to have substrate in tanks or painted bottoms of tanks or something underneath the tank so that they cannot see through it. All right, guys, I've got some house guests and I need to go spend some time with them. So I'm going to pull this one up a little short. I think we've broached the subject of substrate for new fish hobbyists, someone that is new to the hobby. And I think you guys have given them some good suggestions. And I think this is a topic that we could probably spend another live stream on. So we'll do the next one on substrate again. There are a couple of other areas that I think we should get into a little deeper and try to make it more clear for new hobbyists exactly what's going on inside the substrate. All right, I hope I've helped a little. Thank you guys for spending some of your valuable time with me this Saturday afternoon. I hope you guys have a good weekend. And good luck with your fish. Next week I'll go ahead and try to add a walkthrough on my fish tanks. I can get my extension cord out and we can take the webcam and go as far as we can into the other rooms to look. Thank you guys and good luck with your fish.